Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss, and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Good morning, my name's Tom Harwood and this is the briefing on GB News. Now today we're going to be talking about the British energy security strategy unveiled today, an enormous day in our politics. Also Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, is in Brussels. We'll explore that and the 2-child benefit limit. All that to come after your headlines.
Good morning, it is 9:34. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Business Secretary says the UK's new energy strategy should help reduce energy bills within the next few years, but admitted it would do little to alleviate rising bills now. The strategy published today aims to boost homegrown nuclear, wind and solar and hydrogen power to reduce the UK's dependence on overseas oil and gas and keep energy prices stable. Under the plans, the government hopes to deliver up to 8 nuclear reactors by 2030, equivalent to 1 reactor a year. The UK is banning all imports of Russian energy, sanctioning more banks and stepping up its supply of weapons to Ukraine. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss announced the new measures at a NATO gathering of foreign ministers in Brussels this morning. Ukraine's foreign minister says the country needs more weapons from its NATO allies to repel Russian forces and is insisting on a full oil and gas embargo on Russia. People who've been infected with coronavirus have an increased risk of serious blood clots for up to 6 months. Researchers in Sweden say there's a significant increase in chances of blood vessels becoming blocked in the lungs. There's also an increased risk of deep vein thrombosis for 3 months after having the infection. People with underlying health conditions are more likely to be affected. Labour has called on the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, to explain his wife's non-domiciled tax status. It follows reports by The Independent that she may have saved millions by not paying UK tax on foreign income. A security guard accused of spying for Russia at the British Embassy in Berlin will appear in court today. David Smith, who's a British national, is charged with 9 offences under the Official Secrets Act. Royal Mail has unveiled a new set of stamps showcasing the diversity of migratory birds that arrive in the UK. The 10 featured stamps range from seabirds that migrate along the UK's coastlines to rare birds of prey. You're up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and radio. Now let's head to Tom for this morning's briefing.
A very good
Now
morning
let's
to
head to
you.
Tom
It's
for this morning's briefing.
9:36 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and on your radio. Now, Boris Johnson is to make nuclear power the backbone of the UK's new energy strategy, which will be published today. Up to 8 new reactors are planned to make up a significant chunk of what the strategy sets out will be 95% of Britain's electricity delivered from domestic renewable and low-carbon sources by 2030. This comes, of course, against the backdrop of a cost of living crisis, particularly an energy crisis and a renewed Western desire to move away from dependence on Russian oil and gas. Well, let's cross now to Mark Jenkinson, the Member of Parliament for Workington and member of the Energy Committee. Welcome to the programme, Mark. First of all, this is a strategy that has been a very long time coming. Over a month ago, the Prime Minister promised it in days. It's finally here now. Big emphasis on nuclear, but a bit of controversy over the lack of specifics on onshore wind. The Labour Party going in very heavily this morning, suggesting that the Tory party has put politics above energy security on that issue.
Well, look, I mean, I'm not here to speak in favour of onshore wind, and nor I don't think would I. I think it's, when we compare it to offshore wind and other sources, particularly those we need for baseload such as nuclear, I think it's relatively inefficient. And speaking as from one of the Borough that at one point had the highest concentration of onshore wind turbines in the country, I'm not sure my constituents would appreciate even more onshore wind. So I think onshore wind for me is not where our future energy security lies. I'm more excited about the nuclear announcements. 8 reactors by 2030, 25% of our electricity generation coming from nuclear by 2050. You know, I think there's a lot there for people like me who've been banging the drum for nuclear. Of course, it was I worked in the nuclear industry prior to coming to Parliament, but I've spent my time in Parliament banging the drum for more nuclear as a low carbon energy source, and here we are. We finally get some big announcements on that, and I couldn't be happier on that front.
There seems to have been some discussion between the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, particularly on this question of nuclear, but also in terms of funding insulation, something that will, of course, reduce people's bills. Has that tension between number 10 and 11 hampered this new strategy?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for what went on or didn't go on between number 10 and number 11, but a couple of weeks ago, we were reading reports that we wouldn't get 6 new reactors because the Treasury weren't happy with the cost. So here we are, a couple of weeks later, seeing 8 reactors, 24 gigawatts. So I'm not convinced that the reports that we've been reading over recent weeks weren't overblown.
Well, Mark Jenkinson, thank you very much for talking us through theirs. And apologies for anyone listening on the radio. There seemed to be a little bit of background interference there. Well, let's move on and discuss the nuclear energy strategy in greater detail. The government's plans to increase homegrown energy will be, of course, multi-pronged, as we were discussing, and seek to protect the British public from some of that price volatility we see when dependent on foreign markets. Well, a large focus of that, of course, is nuclear power. The government says the strategy will deliver the equivalent of 1 nuclear reactor a year, instead of 1 a decade, as we've seen in the past. But how will this be achieved? And frankly, is it enough? Well, joining me now is Tom Gretex, the CEO of the Nuclear Industry Association. Welcome to the programme, Tom. This is a bold strategy, but of course, we're not going to see any of this particularly soon. What do you make of what the government has set out this morning?
Well, I think, frankly, the government has got to a position where collectively as a country we should have got to 10 or 15 years ago, which is a recognition that if we are serious about not just decarbonising, but ensuring we have energy security, that the volatility of prices is much reduced in our energy mix, then we should be making sure we've got lots of low carbon capacity, of which nuclear is one element. And, you know, you're quite right that it won't deliver immediately in terms of the power capacity, but getting started on those projects now means that next time we're in this situation, we'll be in a lot better position. And frankly, if we'd done it 10 or 15 years ago, we wouldn't be needing to have this conversation today.
We're seeing a difference in the strategy between the large-scale sort of Hinkley Point C style reactors and plants versus what are called small modular reactors, which may well be able to get generating in pretty fast order compared to the longer timescales for larger stations. Are you enthusiastic about the prospect for small nuclear reactors?
Yes, I am. I'm very enthusiastic about what SMRs can add to the mix. I don't think it's a choice, frankly, between the two. I think we're going to need both in terms of what's readily available now. The next project will probably be Sizewell C, which is a design which has already been approved, and the equipment's qualified, and the workforce is in place, and supply chain's in place, and you can move on to that relatively quickly. But if what's promised in the strategy in terms of unblocking some of the barriers and making some really rapid progress on things like siting and a range of different things comes to pass, then we could have the first of those modular reactor designs. The Rolls-Royce is the UK consortium, but there are others as well. But we could have the first of those delivering power, within 10 years. Now that is pretty rapid for a technology which is currently in the stages of having its design approved. But it needs what's pointed to in that strategy, real action and focus and urgency on getting all the things that go around enabling those developments to happen unblocked and moving more quickly than we have done in the past. And that's very, very welcome, I think, because it's going to mean that we can get to an energy security position with most of our energy coming from low carbon sources much more quickly than would otherwise have been the case.
Of course, even 1 decade from now would miss that 2030 target for 95% of electricity to be low carbon or no carbon. I wonder what actually is the net effect of this, of course, because we are seeing a number of our nuclear power stations be decommissioned over the course of this decade. And really, the strategy says that we're going to get up to around a quarter of our energy coming from nuclear. That's not all too different from where we were a few years ago.
No, but there's a big difference in that electricity as a proportion of our energy will be much more significant than it has been. Currently, it's about 17-18%. Much more of our energy, be that in transport, in industrial process, in heating, will either come directly from electricity or will come from energy sources that are derived from electricity or produced through electricity, like hydrogen through electrolysis, for example. So the amount of electricity capacity we're going to need is going to be much more. So if you look at it in terms of gigawatt capacity, it looks like a lot more, but it gives us broadly the same proportion that we had 15 or so years ago when it was about 25% of our power coming from nuclear. At the moment, it's about 15%, and that's going down because, as you quite rightly say, our current fleet of power stations is getting close to the end of its generating life, and so they need to be replaced. But we need to do more than replace them if we're going to have that secure, reliable, low-carbon system we're talking about.
I'm concerned with this decommissioning schedule because is there going to be a gap before we can get these new nuclear power stations up and running? Will we see a decrease in capacity, in supply, in the meantime? Or is there enough to bridge that gap?
We're already seeing and have already seen in the course of the last few months, as the first of those power stations that have retired, a reduction in the low carbon capacity that we've got and the low carbon firm capacity that we've got, the bit that's not weather dependent. And we'll see that, I think, probably in our outlook in terms of the emissions that we'll have coming through the system in the next couple of years. We'll start to bridge some of that gap when Hinkley opens. That will replace some of it. But no, we need to move much more quickly. And I think that's what's very welcome about what's been announced today. And we look forward to the detail of it, in that it's addressing and acknowledging that real urgency and having to move at much quicker pace than we have done previously. And we need to do that to minimise the impact of that gap.
Well, Tom Gretex, thank you so much for talking us through those issues. Clearly a very, very important strategy and a strand of that strategy this morning. Tom Gretex from the Nuclear Industry Association, thanks for joining us. Now, something else happening today. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is in Brussels to meet with G7 leaders and, of course, some NATO leaders as well, where she's expected to push for a hard deadline on ending the West's reliance on Russian oil. It comes as the US and the UK agreed to send more weapons and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, with UK military chiefs saying that the next 3 weeks will be crucial. Well, Rear Admiral Chris Parry is a former Royal Navy commander and he joins me now. Welcome to the programme. I suppose Britain has a significant role to play here in leading a large part of the Western world in terms of our attitude to Russian oil and coal, I should say, being sort of halfway between the Americans and the Europeans on this, not so dependent on Russian oil and gas, but pretty dependent on the knock-on effects. Does that have a genuine military impact, these sanctions? Are we going to see the dovetailing of these two policies, a military and an economic outlook?
Well, if we're going to adopt a strategic approach to Russia, then it has to be a comprehensive approach. And every aspect of every contact of engagement with Russia and its people has to be taken into account. You can't just do military or economic. It has to be cultural, economic, ideological, if you like, social and military. We essentially have a very contested relationship with Russia now, and every Russian citizen has to be made aware of what is being done in their name.
It's extraordinary seeing what has gone on within Ukraine in the last 2 weeks. A really quite heroic effort from the Ukrainian armed forces, something that not many Western commentators expected 2 months ago or just under when this all began. I suppose the worry, though, is that with the redeployment of Russian troops from outside Kyiv towards the east of the country, things could get a lot worse in terms of the Russian assault on Ukrainian cities.
Well, I think we've got to be clear that there's been a switch in Russian policy and strategy. I think they've given up trying to decapitate the Ukrainian regime. And what they're settling for, I believe, is an annexation of territory from the Donbass region through to Crimea. So they've got a land bridge, if you like, that links the Donbass with the Crimea. And I reckon that if they get that, they'll get to the 9th of May, which is their victory celebration for the Second World War, and claim victory in Ukraine. And what I think we're looking at is probably an attempted annexation of territory there that's akin to what happened to Finland at the end of the Winter War in 1940. Russia will simply move across the border and annex the Donbass, the land bridge to Crimea and Crimea itself, and then say, we're freezing the conflict, we're going to keep this territory, what are you going to do about it?
And that is an incredibly concerning prospect because, of course, it's easy to envision that happening. And at that point, if the violence stops, if the shelling stops, if the, frankly, almost genocidal murder stops, it's a very tricky situation to negotiate from that point. If we get to the 9th of May and that happens, what does the West do?
Well, the West continues to bear on Russia. Russia's not going to go away as a strategic opponent. It's occupying Ukrainian land. It's up to the Ukrainians whether they accept that sort of thing or not. But Russia also has a debt to pay. It's got to pay for the rebuilding of all the damage it's done. Its commanders and politicians have got to pay the debt to the international community for the horrific crimes against humanity that have taken place. And let's face it, Russia is a rogue regime in the world, and they're going to have to accept a totally different relationship with the international rules-based system.
Well, it will certainly be a very, very interesting situation. I hadn't quite clocked the 9th of May date being quite so important in the Russian psyche, everything building up to there potentially. Well, for now, Rear Admiral Chris Parry, thank you for talking us through those very important issues here on The Briefing. Now, 5 years ago, the government implemented a two-child benefit policy, which excludes all but the first 2 children from further available benefits. Since then, the fertility rate for third and subsequent children born to poorer families has barely fallen. That's according to a report commissioned by the Nuffield Trust. It suggests that instead of discouraging children that cannot be afforded, the policy simply plunged millions further into poverty. Well, joining me to discuss this now is Professor Jonathan Portes, Professor of Economics and Public Policy at King's College London. Thank you very much for joining us here on The Briefing this morning. I suppose there was a noble intention to this policy in the first place. No one wants to see children in poverty. But the stick approach, as opposed to the carrot, may well have been counterproductive.
That's absolutely right. There was a lot of press comment, to some extent encouraged by the government at the time, saying people were having kids just to take advantage of what was perceived to be an excessively generous benefit system. But that doesn't really seem to be the case. Fertility has actually fallen for people affected by the cap, but it's also fallen for higher income families, and it's also fallen for people who haven't had children, who've only had one child. So we've seen this fertility fall across the board. It doesn't seem to have been driven by the benefit cap itself. So what does seem to be doing is, overall, British parents are having fewer kids, but it's not about the benefit system. It's about wider factors.
It is interesting. I'm not sure many families go through the tax code system or go through various benefits and work out exactly how much cash they'll get before doing the act of procreation. I'm not sure that that's the incentive involved. But I wonder, have we been too focused, have policymakers been too focused on discouraging children when really the whole Western world seems to face a very big demographic crisis across all income scales? People aren't having enough children. Should that be an issue that is rising up the salience ladder in our politics?
I absolutely agree that it should. I mean, we had this, we had a mini baby boom in the 2000s for a variety of reasons, but we've now rejoined the same trend as most of the Western world, or most advanced economies, seeing these continuing falls in fertility. So fertility in the UK, it fell particularly during COVID, which is not surprising, recovered a bit last year, but it's still only 1.6 kids per person, which obviously is well below the replacement rate for the population. And it won't turn itself around on its own. You can see that by looking at South Korea, where the average woman currently has less than one child. It won't automatically reverse itself. It does require us to create a society where young people feel that they are supported to have children, that their children have that they and their children have a good future ahead of them.
And just to be absolutely clear, if we have a replacement rate below 1, if we're having each couple having fewer than 2 children on average, what we have is an inverse demographic period. More old people than young people, more people who need pension payments, NHS care and everything, and a smaller number of people who are funding all of those benefits. There's a really concerning societal, problem that we are really heading towards. What policy changes do we need to see to avoid that?
I think we need to have we need to make this a country where young couples feel that they can have kids, and that's partly about how affordable housing. It's partly about decent and widely available childcare. It's partly about having a good childcare and school system. It's partly just about having a society where people feel that they are happy having kids and bringing up kids. There's a whole range of factors. Some of them are economic, some of them are social, some of them are cultural.
An incredibly complicated picture. I'm afraid we're running to the end of the conversation now, but let's hope that policymakers can be really focusing on this issue. As I say, a very concerning situation.
Yeah. I mean, we really do not want to be like South Korea.
With fewer people funding it. Well, for now, Professor Jonathan Portes, thanks very much for joining us to talk through those issues here on The Briefing. That's it for the show today. Coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick and Mercy. But first, here's the weather forecast.
Hello, good morning. It's cold and it's windy out there first thing, and there'll be some hill snow in places as well, mainly northern Scotland. But Through the day, actually, brightening skies will bring sunny spells for many as this area of low pressure moves into the North Sea. Now, as it moves away, it is bringing colder air southwards across the country, along with spells of rain, hail, snow and showers. But the isobars will slowly start to spread out, and that means that the strongest winds that we've seen overnight will begin to moderate. Nevertheless, it's a windy day, and the hail snow that we're seeing across northern Scotland will push south, degenerate into an area of showers, and mainly the theme through the afternoon is for bright spells and showers. Rain and hail at lower levels, snow over hills, those showers edging further and further south through the day, but it's actually mainly dry and bright in the south, 12 Celsius in the south, 8 for Manchester, 8 for Newcastle, 6 to 7 for the Northern Isles. There'll be further showers coming through during Thursday night, but actually, as we go through the hours of darkness, increasingly the showers become fewer and further between, with a better chance of clear spells, lighter winds, and as a result, a frost forming in many places, particularly for Northern Ireland, central southern Scotland, northern England, North Wales, for example. I think in the far south, it'll turn cloudy and there could be a few spots of rain to wake up to during tomorrow morning. That rain will eventually pull away, allowing brighter skies, even some sunshine to develop quite widely across England and Wales. Scotland and Northern Ireland keep the brisk wind from the north, stays cold, and as a result we'll see further wintry showers, particularly for northern Scotland. But away from the showers, actually for many it's a dry and bright day, plenty of sunshine eventually across most parts of England and Wales, but 10 degrees in the south, only 6 or 7 in the far north. So it's going to feel chilly, and with that chilly air in place, it's a frosty start for many of us on Saturday. But Saturday, with plenty of sunshine around, with lighter winds, despite the chill, will feel like a more pleasant day.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go